Well, the lesson you got was
don't say anything.
you push back against these people, right? They can ruin your career.
Right.
You're done, right?
Yeah.
And no one will help you, right?
Right.
That's the thing.
Right.
Like they even know. They
Nowhere
know
to
what is
go.
being done.
Yeah.
They know why it's being done. Nobody's going to help you.
Right.
So what do you learn from that? You learn, I'm either going to stick my neck out there and potentially lose my head,
right,
or I'm just going to shut up and keep trying to push.
Right. Welcome back to Dear Healthcare, It's You. All right, we are back with Dr. Elisha Yaghmai. Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
And we picked up we left off last time on you needing to transfer schools because you were going to medical school in New Orleans right when the hurricane hit and all that aftermath. So let's pick up there as you were describing that kind of process of needing to apply to transfer and how much of a headache that was and how you really were kind of left in this influx right then of just not knowing what to do and it being quite aggressive in some ways on both sides, the students and the faculty in that position. So let's pick up there.
Particularly the third year medical students, that was one of the hardest problems to solve because of the type of training you do in the third year. So the school had to figure out how and where to continue clinical training.
Right.
There wasn't, at least to my knowledge, there was not a clear contingency plan on how to do that. Nothing had ever been developed for the scenario that went on.
Because how long was it until like hospitals were back up and running, even just for regular?
Oh, in New Orleans, it was months.
Okay, yeah.
Other places were
Yeah.
functional.
Okay.
The hospitals were running, but the real issue was first there was no communication whatsoever.
Right.
Then eventually there was a little bit of communication, but it was limited.
Right.
And then began the process of, we'll have a plan for you next week.
A plan for you in terms of like where they might be placing
what we're
you
gonna
again
do.
for
Yeah,
clinicals.
what are we going to do,
like,
right? How are you going to continue training? So we had been, at that point we were more than a month out, right? We had, and again, like at that point I was sleeping, on the floor of a friend's apartment. Right?
Yeah. Were you back in New Orleans at that point?
No, I wasn't. I was
out
in
of the city
Texas.
still?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But and I was eating cereal because that's all I could afford because I didn't have any financial aid money. So this was a real issue, and I didn't have any of my possessions because those were all stuck in New Orleans.
Right.
And
yeah.
so from my perspective and that of many of my colleagues in the class, we were in a really difficult situation.
Yeah.
We were looking for some kind of guidance, leadership, answers, which largely were not forthcoming.
Right.
And as that situation deteriorated over time, and as there kept being missed deadlines and just things not happening and lack of communication, et cetera, many of us got more and more disenchanted, and so began to say, well, I think we're going to have to just fix this. No one's going to save us, so we're going to have to fix this scenario ourselves. And bear in mind, while all this was going on, we were watching the university make provisions for
These
various other types of students, right?
How long was it, would you say, like the start of this curve of people starting to make that jump of saying, I need to go somewhere else?
It took place over several weeks. Initially, in the initial stages, everybody was 100% in rally around the institution, right? This is terrible. We're all in this.
When you were all put into this position because of the hurricane, where you were all stranded, dealing with house stuff.
That's
all
right.
All
of these things were happening. The issue, so it was not like, hey, the school took a hit, let's get out of here.
Right.
It was the school took a hit, everything is chaos, we get that. But there was there had clearly been very little planning. Yeah. There was no execution.
Yeah, no plan in place for
and
this.
minimal communication.
Right.
So, and just a sort of trust us, we'll fix this at some juncture.
And at some point in the beginning, the no communication was because of those servers being down.
Correct.
So you didn't have email communication.
Right.
But then that became online again at some point.
The students fixed that actually. So the students created a basically a chat group. I think it was on Yahoo, if I recall correctly, at that point. But that's how we were communicating with each other. So the students set this up and began to build in the administrators and kind of reach out to people and get things going. So communication began. But then kind of as this environment really began to sour over time, then people started to look for alternatives to say, okay, I got to do something. Right. My education is being substantially disrupted here. I don't know what to do. Yeah. So then some people began to reach out, and then initially the schools so people would reach out to different institutions, usually wherever they were from. Right. There was an initially favorable response.
from those institutions
saying, we understand your situation, right? You can come and work with it. Because at the time, we weren't even thinking about transferring. We were asking, can I just rotate with you so that I'm doing something?
Just to be doing some clinical
Can I just come in and do some clinical work so that I can just
keep
moving
going.
forward, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and we can worry about what it looks like later. It wasn't that I want to transfer to you. It was that I just want to just not be sitting here doing nothing at all, right?
Is that unprecedented, or does that happen sometimes within the medical school?
So there is precedent for we're going to rotate at another institution. So for example, like if you're a fourth year medical student, you really want to do residency at some hospital, right? You might try to set up an away rotation there, where you go there and work with them for a month so that they get to know you.
So that's not totally abnormal.
It's not insane. No, it's just not usually done during third year, usually, because you're usually rotating at your home institution.
Yeah.
So that was the initial thing. And so we went from favorable response, we could probably do this, to dead silence, to nope, not going to do it. And eventually what happened actually was that one of the students got word back from the administration of one of the medical schools that had been willing to take him to do a rotation with them, saying, sorry, we've received word from your medical school to not accept you. Not to transfer, just to rotate and do get some more clinical training, right? So
with the intention of returning
with the intention of returning
when it was back
with the intention of returning when things were back, right?
Yeah.
So they blocked that, and when that happened, that is when things began to go south, because all of a sudden we're saying, wait a minute, we weren't trying to leave, we weren't trying to ask for our money back, we were just trying to find a place to go in a very unusual situation to keep training, and you have gone and I should add, in that environment, we were being told we could do this. I forgot about that aspect of it. We had even talked about it, and they were told, go find, if a place will let you work with them, then go work with them.
Their issue at the time, too.
This is what we were told, right? So we were being told publicly, go seek this out. Privately, those institutions, at least from what they shared with us, was they were being told by the very same people, don't take our students. That burned the trust down, right? Really, really quickly.
And really quick question about the financial piece, because you had mentioned you're not receiving financial aid during this time. Would that financial aid have been from the school itself?
It was,
or is that from elsewhere?
The money would come into the school, and the school was supposed to distribute it out to you, right? So it was loans and other things that you had taken, right? Medical student debt is usually very high.
But because you weren't in a clinical setting then.
No, what had happened actually was they often messed up, at least at this era in that school, they often messed up your financial aid. So our financial aid had not been distributed on time. It should have been distributed before the hurricane hit. It was not distributed on time, so we were already late.
So it wasn't even about the hurricane initially, and then it was just because the infrastructure was all boggled.
Once it all got, then it was who knows when the money will show up, right? And actually, in the end, for many of us, the reason we were able to make any ends meet was because at that point, FEMA had made payments to people in the area. They just deposited money into your bank account.
Okay. Not even student-wise, in general.
I was down to, I forget what I had, maybe $50 or something. That was it. That was all I had. And then FEMA showed up and put some money in my bank account, and that was how I was able to afford anything else at that point, right?
Wow.
So because I was living entirely off financial aid. So, and I think many other students were in a similar situation.
Right.
So that was the problem. So the trust got broken because, again, it was public statement here, go do this, and then private statements were actually actively subverting you in the background. Right. And so then we were like, well, if you're not being honest with us about this, what else are you not being honest with us? And then it was, well, then, okay, then add to that, well, we have a plan. Well, then what is the plan? We'll tell you next week. Oh, the next week comes. We'll tell you actually next week. So the trust began to break down. And then in that context, we began to see, okay, you've handled your undergraduates, you took care of your preclinical students in medical school, you took care of your fourth year students, you've taken care of everybody but us in this third year class, we're not taken care of. And again, in retrospect, that was probably the heaviest lift in terms of getting something done. But
was to find those clinical spaces.
Right?
Yeah.
But there was no honesty.
Right.
That was really the problem. It wasn't, hey, this is a huge disaster.
It was the CYA mentality rather than it being about you guys.
Yes.
Making sure everybody's taken care of.
Or even
clear
making
communication.
Really, it was about the communication, right? And I think that was the first problem, right? And it went back, I think from their perspective, I think they felt this was a matter of institutional survival to some degree. I think they thought that allowing people to leave in any context was going to lead to mass flight, which was going to lead to essentially dissolution of at least that year, possibly the institution, right? At least it was going to lose all of its students or lose many of its students. I don't actually think that was true. Right. And I can say, speaking from the perspective of both the students and all the conversations we were having on the side, that wasn't where anybody started.
Right.
That was where we ended because of the perception of dishonesty and subversion, right, on the part of the administrators that were responsible for that at that point in time.
Yeah.
That was the issue.
And how old were you then?
I was probably 25, maybe
25.
24, 25. Yeah.
I mean, had you felt, I feel like at that time in a lot of people's lives, that's a time that you often are starting to kind of feel some disillusionment with some authority figures in a way that you haven't felt, regardless of extenuating circumstances. Had you maybe started to feel that at all prior to this, or was this really like glaring, like opening that door toward like, oh, like I'm on the path, but like it's not the, you know, yellow brick road that I was told it was?
We had already, at least in that institution, we'd already had a little bit of that.
Some of that,
a little bit of that. You know, I'm just to give you, here's another example. So I go to a lecture by one of the local, I think he was a toxicologist, if I recall correctly. And he spent his hour with us trying to convince us that cigarettes actually were not harmful. This is in medical school. Oh. Cigarettes were not harmful, and
why was that an important topic?
Turned out that he was one of the docs that testified on behalf of the cigarette companies in the past. Yeah, but this doctor was a faculty member right in the school, and so we're sitting there as I think it was second year of medical school. Right? We're sitting there saying, well, this kind of goes against. I don't know. Everything we've been taught everywhere else, and all the scientific papers we can find, and everything else. But you're giving us you're giving us the industry lobbyist argument, right?
Right.
You know what I mean? It was like a thank you for smoking moment, right? Right. But we're like, but this is you're not in Washington D.C. talking to a senator, right? You're a professor of medicine at a medical school. So there were experiences we had like that. That. Would at least raise your eyebrow. Is probably the way I describe it. So there were elements of that there, but this was, I think, the first big in the medical world institutional failure. I think that we saw, and in retrospect, again, maybe institutional failure is too strong a word for the circumstances, but.
And you guys were the ones paying the price for it, where you were left figuring out where to go, and then being told to go, and then being told you can't go.
Yes, that's right. Basically, just getting jerked around.
So how did you end up finding where you ended up transferring? So how did you find your way into that?
In that situation, so what happened at that time actually was that my girlfriend was at UT Southwestern at that time. Now my wife, and so I thought, well, maybe I'll just try to go up there. Yeah, and
that's Dallas.
That's in Dallas. That's right. Yep.
For those that don't know.
And I went through that iteration basically of going and talking to the administration, and over time, and we had some conversations, and basically explaining, at this point, given everything that has gone on, I don't want to be there anymore because I have lost confidence in the institution.
Right. So you were initially seeking to transfer. You didn't do this piece of like trying to find a clinical place.
No, initially I had, and other colleagues had, but it became, this is not about just a rotation anymore. This is, I don't think these folks, I think they've put the interests of the institution above the interests of the students that they're allegedly serving, right? Which is a kind of a common.
It's an important part of your culture and your stance on a lot of things. I mean, that's,
This was It's that problem that I think we see increasingly in American society, right, where the institution exists for the sake of its own perpetuation, right?
Right.
Allegedly, it serves a mission.
Right.
But in reality, its main mission from its perspective is that it should keep going.
Right, right.
No matter who gets sacrificed or what has to be done, it should keep going. There's never a point at which it says, well, maybe I'm either not fulfilling my mission.
Right. Should we look at ourselves?
Or maybe I shouldn't even exist if I can't fulfill my mission, right? Instead, it's just how do we keep these wheels turning?
Yeah.
It's that institutional inertia. So it had that feel. So I went and had that conversation with them. Ultimately,
just to clarify, with Southwestern.
With Southwestern, yes. So I had to talk to the administrators there, and then while I was doing that, some other students were talking to other institutions, right? And so some of us were able to get transfers.
Yeah.
Right, out at that point. And that is when the gloves really began to come off. So then other students saw that happening and who felt very similarly.
Yeah.
So they also began to have those same conversations and were getting some favorable responses.
Yeah.
And then that's when all that other stuff, happened, where people were having the transfers extended and then rescinded.
Right.
Based on just phone calls that were going on in the back channels.
All from like people in your cohort, like, was it like a lot that were having that issue?
A significant number, it was a significant number of people because Tulane drew people in from around the country.
Right.
And so when this happened, people got scattered. They often went back to their home community. And then the local medical school was willing to accept them.
Right.
And at that time, we looked up the regulations so that the only thing you needed to have was an accepting institution. So it wasn't like you had to be cleared by the institution you were leaving. But what was really happening was the institution that was being left effectively did have to clear you and was calling and getting people's transfers rescinded.
They were like blacklisting
and forcing
you guys,
them to stay. That's correct.
And so as you transferred to Southwestern, were you able to start right away, and go in mid-clinical?
Relatively quickly, I started on a rotation within, I forget how long it took. It wasn't very long.
Yeah.
It was a couple of weeks, something like that. And then I started on a rotation there.
Right.
Yeah.
And when we were talking prior, you mentioned off camera that I want on film for us, for our listeners, but you mentioned a difference in culture and in prestige at the institution you were leaving versus the institution you went to. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so, medical students tend to take rankings very seriously.
Right,
What they actually mean is a very different question. That's a whole different discussion in terms of what value they really have and how they're determined, but U.S. News stands by them, so we won't get into that today.
Okay. Another day.
There's a lot of stuff in that is not really accurate. But, but be that as it may. So, Southwestern is a higher rated medical school in those rankings.
Okay.
That's not the same thing as in terms of what quality of education, whatever else is offered. That's very difficult actually to compare.
But in national rankings.
But in terms of national rankings, right, it's a higher ranked place. And then the culture was also very different. And I would say Tulane's culture was much more collegial and friendly. And Southwestern's culture was much more non-collegial and unfriendly.
What do you mean by that?
It was just much more abusive. That's
really?
100%.
In terms of your your workload?
Well, I'll give you an example. So I went into my obstetrics rotation.
Okay.
Obstetrics at Southwestern is a very well-known, very well-respected residency.
Yeah.
And, they recruit very well, and it's a very high-intensity place. They have very high volumes.
Yeah. And obstetrics is like baby delivery.
Baby delivery, right? Yeah.
Okay.
So I went into that. That was my second rotation there. Bear in mind, the only thing I'd done before is I started up in psychiatry at the Children's Hospital, which had a totally different system, different computer system.
Right.
So I'm going into OB. This is my first. I've never been in this hospital.
Yeah.
I don't know the computer system. I don't know anything.
Right.
There was no allowance made for that whatsoever in terms of how we were treated, bringing you up to speed. It was just expected. If you don't. I would get chewed out for not knowing a paperwork thing that there was no way for me to know because I had never been there before, right?
No training on that end at all.
There was no nothing. We just got thrown into it, right? Which understanding again,
right? As a transfer,
we kind of got slung in the middle of the year.
Yeah.
This is irregular. We didn't even start with orientation, right?
What about for students that had been there the whole time? Were they having similar issues?
No.
With being chewed out.
Not from yes, people got chewed out, but not in the same way because they at least knew what to do, right? And they'd been there for a couple of years already.
That system.
Right? They were in that, but it was like. So, for example, in OB, there was a resident room. There was a room on the OB ward, right? If you were a medical student, you couldn't go in there unless there was a resident there.
Oh.
Let's say you weren't doing anything at the moment.
Yeah.
You could not physically go into the room or sit in a chair because
which was like a break room.
It was just a break room. It's just a break room. There was nothing magical going on in there. It was literally a break room. You could not go in. You had to sit in chairs along the wall. And appear to be reading an OB textbook. That's what you could see. You either were in a room doing something, or you had to be sitting on that chair reading an OB text.
Appear to be reading. Okay, so, you don't have to read it, but you have to look like it.
So this is the case, right?
Okay.
So I never forget one of the early ones. I get that what we would do in there is go into baby deliveries or go into C-sections.
Yeah.
These were the two things we would do. In the C-section as the medical student, right? You would stand there and hold the retractor.
What is a retractor?
A retractor is basically a device that's meant to kind of so if they make an incision, they make a cut, right, to open up up the abdomen, right, and then open up the uterus or the womb, right, so they can get the baby up. Someone has to hold a metal device to just keep that open while they're trying to work, right? So as a medical student, you'd stand there and hold the retractor.
Okay.
And a lot of times they're busy, they're doing whatever, no one's talking to you, no one's teaching you anything, right? You're just standing there as a hand, and you're supposed to be learning, I guess, by osmosis sort of staring.
Right.
So by this time, I was like, I don't think C-sections, number one, I'm not learning anything when I'm in them.
Right.
Number two, I don't think that this is a thing that I really want to do, right, in the long term. So I don't know that I'm gaining very much from standing there. What I did want to do was be able to deliver a baby.
Right.
So I tell my senior resident, can I not go to C-sections? Can I just go to the actual vaginal deliveries, right, that are going on, because I really do want to be able to do that, and I need more exposure to that, right? I need more of these. That was my logic, right? You can critique it, you can say that was wrong, but that was my reasoning. I tell the senior resident this. I go to sit down in my chair. It's like 4 a.m, right? And I'm sitting there trying to read my text. 4 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. I fall asleep, right? I wake up.
In the chair in the hallway.
I wake up in the chair in the hallway. I fall asleep doing this. I wake up. The attending physician is kicking my foot to wake me up. This is really the case, okay? He's kicking me in the foot to wake me up. I wake up. He takes me in the back room and chews me out because I have told my senior resident that I do not want to do any C-sections ever again, and that like this is totally unacceptable. Right? And I'm like, well, that wasn't the conversation we had. The conversation was, if I have a choice between these two things, I would like to do the deliveries for the reasons that I stated. Right. Right. But it was in other words, it was a come in with guns blazing. Don't ask any questions. Right. Guns are blazing. Right. You have by
more
questioning
top-down
anything
authority on like,
very much.
Yeah.
Very, very much.
Was it more collaborative in Tulane?
Yeah. I didn't do obstetrics there, so I can't speak. But in general, yes, the feel was a little bit more. Was a little bit more collaborative in terms of working with your supervising physicians, right? So there was that, and then there was an internal medicine rotation I had. So what the attending there would do, his thing, he seemed to enjoy humiliating the medical students. Like this was his thing. He was known for this. Like this wasn't just us. Yeah. So
like he had a fun hazing.
Oh, 100%, right? Yeah. And the thing is this in medicine, like any professional skill, right? The more you do it, the better you get at it, usually.
Hopefully.
Right? And the more, hopefully, yeah, it's not always true, but it could be true. and it feels easier to you. In other words, right, over time, I would take, it's just, I don't know, if you're trying to do basketball, right? You start off, you're shooting, you're not very good, right? You shoot several thousand shots a day or whatever it is, right? Yeah. Eventually, it's really easy for you to make that shot. Yeah. And then you look back at the 10-year-old who's you 15 years ago, right? And they stink, right? Yeah. And it'd be like going to them and being like, why can't you shoot, right? Like, I'm fantastic at this. Why aren't you fantastic at it, right?
Yeah, that's a good analogy, honestly. I've not thought about, medical school in that way, but yeah, for sure, 100%. That's what you guys are learning new muscle memory.
You are, right? Because so the thing is that medicine, the practice of medicine is rapid sequence, for non-surgical specialties at least, it's rapid sequence pattern recognition, right? What it means is I have run through this iteration, right? Yeah. I've had X number of patients who've come in and told me this so many times that I now know what the pattern is. Right? I know that when you tell me this set of symptoms, odds are it's this, and if it's not that, it's this second thing, and if it's not that, it's this third thing, right? And we're going to work through this list based on highest statistical probability. Right. People may not articulate it in those terms, but that's actually what's going on, or what should be going on.
It's a flow chart, basically, within you, right?
It's a flow chart. You've internalized a flow chart, right? And you've internalized a set of rough probabilities. Right, yeah.
That you can do quickly as you could do it more.
Exactly, right? So when you start, it's like, every time they come in, right, you have to start from zero and be like, okay, all right, so they said they have chest pain. All right, now what causes chest pain again, right? Here's my list of things.
Look at all the possibilities, what's most probable. Go next.
Fast forward 15 years, right, if you tell me chest pain, right, I'm already asking, okay, I'm asking you a series of questions, right, rule this out, rule that out, check. We do all of that in 3 minutes. Right, yeah. But that would have taken me an hour at the beginning, right?
And maybe not even knowing which questions
100%.
You needed to ask.
Well, it's because I was going to ask. I was going to ask you 100 questions, right? Because I didn't know how to target my questions. This is medical students are notorious for this, right? They take an hour to do an admission interview, that the attending can do in 5 minutes, right?
Because of years of experience.
Because of years of experience, you know what to ask, you know how to cut it down quickly, right? What parts of information are irrelevant, you can filter those out.
And probably you know how to circle back if there's something that was missed of a question that like could have been asked but was highly improbable. Right. To then when it's like, oh, now there's another piece of information or this didn't work, then you can quickly circle back to like, well, I would have asked this, but it was really low probability. What about that? Right. That makes sense.
You pull that out. Into this environment, though, and I think academia may be a little worse for this, but I couldn't speak to that 100%. What you have is this weird dynamic, right, where you have very experienced people trying to teach people that have no experience, right? And much less knowledge. And it's a setup for abuse. Right?
Well, and the people that are over you in these scenarios, are they, other than being your advisor when you're in that setting, like, are they connected to the school regularly?
Yeah, they're faculty. They are faculty. Usually they're faculty,
So they are teaching persona. They're not...
Theoretically, yes.
Theoretically, Okay.
Theoretically, they're teaching, right? But academia has a lot of personality types in it, right?
Right.
There are people that are there because they want to do research. They could not care less about teaching. They're just required to show up on the ward every now and then and teach people. But really what they care about is the grant money they're getting and what's going on in their lab, right?
For the big
they don't care about teaching you
pieces.
clinically. It's irrelevant, right? For that matter, they may not even be great teachers, right? I mean, a great researcher is not necessarily a great teacher and vice versa. I mean, they may be, but they also may not be. But in a lot of medical schools, that's irrelevant, right? You're here as professor of blah, blah, blah. Right. You need to do X number of weeks of clinical teaching time on the wards, right? And they're there the whole time thinking about, oh, my project, okay, what's going on with my test tubes, right?
It's like the high school coach who also has to teach.
It's very much like that, right? And you care about one or the other, but you don't care as much about the other, right? And you may not be good at what you're doing. So you have that, and then you have other people that, I mean, to some degree, they like the power dynamic, right? They like being the teacher. They like being the center of attention of the team, right? They enjoy that vibe, right? They like the vibe of they're not working with colleagues, right? They're working with people that are inferior to them, if not as humans, they're inferior to them in terms of professional knowledge and skill all the time. Yeah. They're always teaching people that know less than them. They're always working with people that know less than them and have less experience, right?
And you're saying that they like
there are people that enjoy that. They enjoy that dynamic, right? Because there's a power dynamic, right? There is a power dynamic. And medical school is very hierarchical. Right. And if you want to achieve your goals, right, you need to please the people that have the power to write your recommendations, to give you grades, right? You need to keep these people happy.
Without much pushback, I imagine.
Very little, right? Very little pushback, because pushing back can get you in serious trouble. Right. So here again, actually backing up a moment, because you'd ask about Tulane, I forgot this aspect also. So there was a well-known senior faculty member at Tulane who had a notorious reputation for harassing the female medical students. Interesting. Including women that were in my class, right? That had their own personal experience with this.
Someone that in clinicals or like in a
in clinicals,
setting?
In clinicals, right? So they would go in and there'd be all kinds of, we can describe the hijinks and things that he would get up to, but he would get up to things that clearly were improper, right? Made these women very uncomfortable, and they would go complain about it, and not one thing would happen because he was a very high-profile person. Really? He had a very famous name. He was quite powerful within the specialty in the academic world. So they did nothing to him until the year he was going to retire, at which point then, after the file was who knows how thick of complaints, they finally decided to take action in the year that he had already said he was going to retire. That is when action was finally taken. We also, incidentally, I forgot that piece, we also saw that go on in that institution, right? Yeah. So we're sitting here hearing from female medical students about what their experiences are and how they've gone to report this, and not one thing has happened.
Yeah, abuse not for being students, but just for being female.
Right, exactly, right? Yeah. But that, what I'm describing is that dynamic, right? Yeah. This individual has power, you don't. Right? And what the actual story that was in circulation around this was that a surgical resident at that time, had tried to take this case forward. Got drummed out of surgery. This was the story that we medical students were getting, right? And this was relatively recent, right? She tried to say something. This guy's super powerful. Right. She got booted from the program or left the program, but then tried to stick somewhere else. And once again, those background calls go on, right? And all of a sudden, nobody wants you anymore, right? And you're not able to pursue your chosen specialty. Why? Because you dared to file a complaint against somebody with more power.
Which in 2022 sounds astronomically asinine.
Yeah.
But in
this was 2000, 2003, 2004,
exactly. Like, 100%. Totally different story. I mean, not on what was happening, but on how we treat it as a society. Well,
I mean, I think even, obviously we knew it was wrong.
Right, of course.
But the lesson...
There wasn't a pathway. There wasn't a way to be heard.
Well, the lesson you got was...
Don't say it.
You push back against these people, right? They can ruin your career.
Right.
You're done, right? Yeah. And no one will help you, right? That's the thing. Like they even know. They know what is being done. They know why it's being done. Nobody's going to help you. Right. So what do you learn from that? You learn, I'm either going to stick my neck out there and potentially lose my head, right? Or I'm just going to shut up and keep trying to push.
Right. Because someday I won't have to deal with them.
Because someday I won't have to deal with them, right? I'll get out of this and I'll finish my residency and then I can go somewhere else and I can work somewhere that makes me happy, right? But I just got to put up with this. Right. That was the culture, and probably to some degree still is, right? Yeah. Even if
that's what you were feeling, in a male seat of the same student seat, though, when you had transferred in those clinical areas.
And so, to give you here again, like another example, so this one doc, what he would do is he'd come in every day. He would ignore the residents. He really didn't have much to do with them, at least not in front of the medical students. Yeah. Right? So we would, as medical students at that time, we were supposed to be on call every fourth night. Okay. On call means you're up all night, going around with your resident to see patients.
Okay, you are in the hospital.
You're in the hospital, you're running around doing this. So this is every fourth night, right? Which means, you over the course of a month, or you have about a week where you don't sleep at all. Right. You go the whole night without sleeping. Right. So 1 week out of 4. In fact, I mean, just imagine trying to do that every month. Right. 1 week out of 4, you're not sleeping. This is pretty common in the medical profession.
Because you would have stuff you need to be doing during the day too. You're saying.
Exactly. Yeah. You'd come in, you'd work all day.
Yeah.
You would then work all night.
Yeah.
And then you'd work the next day until about noon.
Yeah.
This is how it was done at that time.
Yeah.
Right. But here's the thing. So the normal policy in that institution was you come in, you write you work all day, you go all night. And then you were supposed to submit something called a history and physical document. What you were supposed to do was take one of the new admissions that came in from that evening, right? And then 4 days later, on your next on-call cycle, you were supposed to submit a written document that said, here's all the information I gleaned.
Oh, okay.
Here's my thoughts about possible diagnoses and which one I think is the most likely and what treatment we should do, right?
Okay.
So everywhere else, all the other students, for the most part, they had 4 days to churn out this written report.
Yeah.
We had to present it by 8 a.m. that morning after we'd been on call all night, right?
And when did the night shift start?
I think it was about 7 o'clock at
Okay.
night. So you had from 7 a.m. and I'm sorry, maybe it was 8, whatever. It was about 12 hours approximately at night, right? And then you had to have this thing handed in by the time he showed up in the morning. So you had to write it overnight, right?
While you were supposed to be doing
While you're supposed to be following your resident around and seeing patients, right?
Yeah.
So 2 things happen. The first thing is that we start, because he's required us to turn in this paper, right?
Yeah.
So we start saying, okay, residents, well, we need some time to write this.
Yeah.
We cannot follow you around all night. The residents get super angry with us for not following them around. So we meet with them and say, we can't, it was myself and another medical student, we say, look, we can't go with you. We have to write these papers. We're being required by our attending physician to write these papers, and we have to turn them in at 8 a.m. And you know this.
Right.
And their response was, well, that's not our problem. That's your problem. You need to talk to them. But if you continue to do this, like, we're going to have to write you down on your evaluation, right?
What? so and would this attending physician be over these residents as well?
Yeah.
So they like that's their direct boss, and they just still would just
care.
Be like, whatever.
This is the response.
I'm your boss.
This is the response we received. Yeah.
Wow.
That's it. I'm your boss, and I want you to follow me around. And even though, so you see what I'm saying?
But there was no backup from this attending physician to be like, no, guys, I actually need them to have this paper in at 8.
We're at the bottom of the hierarchy.
Again, no communication across, and then you guys are screwed.
Right.
I mean,
yeah. So we're making our residents mad by not following. The culture at that place was you follow them around until they dismiss you. You can't go anywhere, right? And if you do, your name is mud, right? If you do that. So we're in a position of, well, but if we do that, then we can't finish our paper. And if we can't do that, then our attending will be mad, right? So what do? We just got stuck in this purgatory between these 2 things. So then what would happen is then you'd hand in your document. He didn't want you to just hand it in. He wanted you to give it an oral presentation. But before he would do the oral presentation, he would take you on about 2.5-hour walk arounds. So you'd walk around to see all these patients. And during that process, he would do a process that in medical parlance is called pimping, which basically means keep asking you questions. So I'm asking you questions about all kinds of different aspects of the patient and their care and diagnoses and what's the differential diagnosis.
While in the room with them or both, after?
Both while in the room, while walking around, whatever else, right? So
like quizzing you?
Yeah, but it's constant quizzing. So imagine you've been up since 7 a.m. the previous day, even earlier than that, right? You're showing up at 5 a.m., right, to go in. So you've been up since 5 a.m. the previous day. It's now 10 a.m. the next day, right? Okay? And you have somebody like just blasting questions at you the whole time, right? And then at the end of that, when you go through that whole process of walking around, now he wants you to give an oral presentation of this multi-page paper that you just had to write, right?
A few hours before, though, so it's not very recently in your brain that's fried at this point.
Yeah,
like,
this is the issue.
Is there any break in this night?
No,
not at all.
You just roll all the way through,
don't.
right?
Wow.
And then the thing was that there are different styles of this, right? So some doctors, when they do this, their goal is to teach you.
Right.
Meaning they're asking you questions. The point is not necessarily whether you get it right, whether you get it wrong.
Right. It's to be constantly seeing what you know, give more.
And to some degree, to help you learn a thought process, right? Okay, you don't know the answer to this. Why don't you know the answer to this? Well, let's explain what thought process would get you to the right answer.
Like partly like helping instill that flow chart within you. Like
that's
muscle
precisely
memory for that. Okay.
That's precisely, and that's, if you're going to use that technique, not everybody does,
right.
But if you're going to use that technique, that is how it should be used.
That should be the goal. Like
for this doc, the purpose was humiliation. The point was to rub your nose in what you didn't know and how much more he knew than you did.
Really?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%. That was the goal of the question asking process, right? So it would be, I'm going to ask you questions, right? If you don't know it, I'm going to just humiliate you for not knowing the answer to whatever the question is, right? in front of the whole team and everybody else, right? I'm just gonna tear you down for not knowing.
So this is happening in front of other people as well, yeah.
100%, yeah.
Just,
it's the whole team, the whole residents, everybody else that's there, right? So you're just getting dressed down for what you appear not to know. And so, there was one, there was one experience I remember having. The case was a guy that had come in with abdominal pain, right? And he had liver metastases or something like that. So, I wrote up my paper on potential causes of liver metastases in this case, right? The thing about this particular doc was that he really enjoyed cardiology. That was his thing. He knew way more about cardiology than any of us did at that point in time, right? So, and most of the cases we had coming in, a lot of them were heart cases. So we learned very quickly, if you do a heart case, he's going to just tear you to shreds because he knows so much more than you do about this. So we learned, the two of us learned, we probably shouldn't do heart cases because, if you don't want to just get blasted, you got to do something that's a little bit out of his area of intense expertise. So we would do this, right? So we'd pick side topics, right?
Yeah.
And so, I picked one that was abdominal pain. And I finished up my presentation. He's clearly very frustrated because there's really nothing that he can go to town on, right?
Yeah.
It's a more limited topic, which was intentional on my part, right?
You're being smart in how you try to dance around the
we're trying, right?
Like,
So he says, well, tell me the differential diagnosis. Differential diagnosis means give me a list of possible diagnoses that could cause this symptom. Okay. So he says, give me the differential diagnosis for abdominal pain, right? So I'm like, okay. So I start naming diagnoses, right? Yeah. So I go on for about 2 minutes or so, naming everything I can think of that could cause abdominal pain. I finish up and he's like, ridiculous. You forgot hereditary spherocytosis.
Oh my gosh. Ridiculous.
Right.
Oh my gosh. How could you forget?
Right. And I'm like, you know what I mean? And I'm like,
right. I mean, when you type in to Google, we now know that there are so many things that can.
I've never forgotten that though. To his credit, I've never forgotten hereditary spherocytosis.
Right.
Okay.
How often does it come up in your diagnosis for real though?
But it was virtually never. But it was, this was the goal, right? And so there were lots of insults. There was lots of tearing down, on a very personal level, insulting your intelligence, insulting you as a person, not just you need to know more, right?
It was an attack.
You're an idiot, right? It's like this kind of thing. This was the dynamic. So, my co-medical student, right, started taking those papers, right? Yeah. I would try to write what my co-medical student started doing was cutting and pasting out of pre-written medical journals. So look up a topic, cut and paste, and slap it into the paper, and then read that, right? As the thing, right? Funny. He didn't know that this was going on, right? So he'd be like, "Oh, that's wonderful. What a wonderful." I'm right. Oh my God. Yeah, I'm like, well, that was written by a medical professional, right? That wasn't written by a medical student.
A med student.
You don't know this, right? Right. Okay. So I'm trying to do it allegedly the right way. I'm trying to write it myself, right? And you are just ripping me to shreds, right? Well, this is going. So this is the dynamic, right? Yeah. So I take that.
Which kind of goes to what we've talked about before of like the type of person that ends up in medicine.
Yes.
Where it's like, needing to just check the box, like not just check the boxes, but it's an achievement thing. Like he's like accolading this person who's got all the right information, whether they've learned it or not.
Correct, right. Yeah. They have learned a way around, they've learned to achieve an outcome, right?
They've learned a way around.
Whether they learned that information or not is irrelevant, right? They learned how to present the appearance of knowledge. Right. Right. And I don't fault them for that. It was an extremely high stress, awful situation, right? But
points out a flaw.
That's what was going on, right? You're teaching them to find a way to give you the outcome you say you want, whether or not it has any actual effect on how good of a doctor they are or how knowledgeable they really are, right? Yeah. And you're making no allowance for the fact that this person, by definition, has less knowledge and expertise than you do. Yeah. You are a better doctor than them. That's why you're teaching them, right? Right. The point is not, it's not a battle of equals, right? This is a battle of the clear power differential.
Mentorship, for lack of,
except it's not, right? It's like a reverse mentorship. Right. So this was the dynamic, and this was the problem. So you learn to produce the desired outcome rather than go through the process that might actually make you better at the job in the long run. Right. So I take that dynamic and I went to the clerkship director at that time and said, "Hey, this is the experience we're having. Yeah. Like we're getting just torn to pieces. Yeah. What we're being asked to do is not comparable to what our colleagues, our other medical students are being asked to do by their attendings. We are being held to a different standard."
It was like you talked with your class
100%.
And everything.
Yeah, we knew what was going on. Yeah. So I go present this, and he says, "Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we hear about this guy every year. Every year we hear about him. Yeah, he's like that." I'm like, okay, and so what's the plan? Nothing. The plan was nothing. The plan was, yeah, just suck it up. Like that's, yeah, we know he's like this. He treats everybody like this, and just deal with it. Like that's the answer.
You got the short straw. Like,
that's exactly what it was. Yeah. So and then in that same dynamic, so I had actually about that particular rotation, I'd written up like a letter outlining my stuff, and I sent him a letter. Yeah. And his response was, I didn't read your letter. It's too long.
Yeah. You sent it to your attending physician?
No, I sent it to the clerkship director. Yeah. So I documented the things and sent him a letter. And his response was, it was too long, I didn't read it. Just don't care, right? So just deal with it, right?
Wow.
So yeah, this was so again, right?
Yeah.
The vibe here is
put up with it.
You'll
be gone soon.
We have an institution, right? Yeah. We're gonna do what we're gonna do. If it's abusive, it's abusive. You should just live with that, right? Everyone else does.
On this side of things, you've talked, about some of the pieces that happened in New Orleans and said you have more compassion on the faculty side, being an adult now on this other side. But thinking about this situation from where you sit right now, hypothetically, what do you think are the reasons that they wouldn't just excuse this faculty member from their, from their relationship with the university and instead find somebody better?
I think it's one is that within medical education there is to this day still a normalization of an abusive dynamic.
Really?
I actually have much less empathy for those people that I was dealing with at Southwestern than I do for the Tulane people. Yeah. Because with Tulane people I can understand now as an older person with a family.
Right. The personal stressors that were going on.
The whole world is falling apart right now, right? And you're not performing at your best, but I can kind of understand why that might have happened, right? But having since gone on to teach medical students and residents myself, I don't think there was a good excuse for the behavior that I saw from either of those individuals or anybody else that was around them.
The way that it's done.
It's institutional culture, right? Yeah. And medical education, like I said, has that abusive element in it. It has always had that abusive element, at least in modern times, right? The word resident used to be because you lived at the hospital.
Oh.
That's where it came from. You were a resident because you used to live there, and you lived there so that you could be on call every other night so that you didn't miss any interesting cases, right? That was the dynamic, right? Yeah. And so it shifted, and they eventually shifted the work hours, and they did these other types of things, right, to try to improve it. But built into this whole time is this sort of, it's this vibe where people may treat you well. Yeah. But if they don't treat you well, you just shut up and live with it. If, had another experience where there was an attending surgeon. Yeah. You couldn't speak to him as the medical student. You were not allowed to talk to him. If you had a question, you had to ask the resident. And if the resident deemed it worthy to be passed on to the attending physician, right? Yeah. This is within this century, right?
Is it is it a portion of do you ever graduate from this abusive position? Is it hazing and then it becomes brotherhood ever? Or is
I think if you stay in the institution, right? Yeah. If you stay in the institution, possibly. I mean, I didn't stay.
I'm just from an outsider, I'm just thinking about this where I'm there are so many instances of abuse in our culture that I think we've exposed over the last 10 years even that are some of that where we're that was never okay. Right. But there was a brotherhood that led people to be nah, it's fine. We all did it. We all went through those years. But there also has been a lot of abuse exposed in our culture in a lot of industries where we're all just that's not okay. Yes. And it's never been okay, and it shouldn't, and it didn't ever pan to something else either. Why did we stay here so long?
I think there was some element of a hazing and graduation into the fraternity, right? But there also was an element that was just people abusing their power. Yeah. And I think there probably still is.
Because they had finally made it to the point where they had power. They have power, they got to abuse.
And I will also say exactly that. It is a cycle of abuse thing, right? Almost undoubtedly, those people were abused going through their education. And as soon as they got in a position where they could hand down a beating, right, they decided to do the same thing to the people below them, who then did this. And I would say it also becomes a self-selecting thing, right? Yeah. Because when you're in an environment that is like that, some personality types are like, I'm out of here.
Right. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. I'm out. I'm leaving as soon as I can. It begins to self-select, right, for the people that can tolerate that environment, who whether they like it or can tolerate it, who then perpetuate it. Right. Because for them, it's it's worth passing through all this so that I can, put my name up in the stars or the other stars of this academic institution, right? I want to be there too. So you select out for the people that don't like that, and you select in for the people that like or tolerate it, who then perpetuate it to the next generation, who then do the same thing, right? Yeah. This process keeps going through the generations. And then what it produces, and the most pernicious part of it, is it produces people that their best skill is hiding their weaknesses. See what I'm saying?
That's really interesting. Yeah.
And that's the problem, right? Medicine is
rather than working on their weaknesses or just being
acknowledging
honest about them.
Or acknowledging them, right? So when patients have an experience where, for example, the doctor gives them complete certainty on,
right.
whatever this is, and then they go somewhere else and that diagnosis was thoroughly wrong.
Right.
Right? Why did that happen?
Yeah.
Because in many cases, one, it may be a knowledge deficit or whatever else, right?
Yeah.
But even how did the knowledge deficit happen? Because going through the training, the point of the training was to not be humiliated and exposed. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The price of expertise is humiliation.
Yeah.
You have to be bad at a thing before you're good at a thing. But if you're not allowed to be bad at a thing, and this is the whole story of medicine and medical training, you're not allowed to be bad at it, right? Because you're being constantly judged and graded on these things. So if you stink, right, well, then you're inferior, right? So your whole goal is to try to not appear to stink even if you do.
Right.
So you just avoid things that make you uncomfortable. You gloss over the things you don't understand, because if you ask a question, then they know you're stupid, right? You see what I'm saying?
Which never gives you an opportunity to actually change or grow.
That's the issue.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that is our time, but this has been it's so illuminating, honestly. So that's where I'd like to pick up next time, is about where you went from there into your residency and how that kind of went. But I think that we'll probably return to this topic about medical school at a later point of some of this piece of like some of that culture and how that shapes the type of person that ends up coming out of medical school into the actual medical field, That's our time today. Thanks for being with us again, and we'll pick up next time on your residency.
Sounds good.